Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is DK Bhattacharya and we'll be talking about recent trends in world prehistory. Before we go in for understanding the recent trends, it is very important to understand what were the trends available earlier. The two trends that were available till 30s or even 50s of the last century were that they were progressively trying to specialize or standardize various words in typology and technology of stone making techniques. And also there were several techniques of identifying geochronology and talking about geochronological events and so on. So environment on the one hand and typotechnology on the other preoccupied all archaeologists till almost the 50s of the last century. The first time it was felt that these are not capable of answering real questions about culture, culture change, culture behavior was around 1960 when Professor Binford with his wife Sally Binford brought out what is today known as new archaeology. This is the first time you started feeling that these analysis of stone tools are not capable of doing anything beyond giving the analytical paradigms and nothing beyond it. Even then, there was a lady from Israel called Ohel. Dr. Ohel came to England and saw the entire Clactonian industry of Warren's collection in British Museum. And whole Clactonian tools, she measured the platform, she measured the angles, she created special instruments to measure all the details and went on to say that unlike what is believed naturally, that Clactonian does not have a biface, I have found hand axes in Clactonian industry. So there were attempts where typotechnology was kind of standardized or experimentally represented in details, like in fluting technique, all the details of angle of fluting and the details of the retouching angles and so on have been meticulously worked till about 1960. All this meticulous work was not wastage, but it was felt in 1960 that it does not give many answers. And the first person who brought it out was Binford. You know, Binford even went to the extent of creating an analysis which is very interesting. There's a site called Combe-Grenal in Dordogne, France. It is a rock shelter with 63 cultural layers. And at Combe-Grenal, Professor Francois Bode, who is the discoverer and the excavator of this rock shelter, tried to say that there are 4 groups of culture. And he gave them Mousterian of Acheulean tradition, typical Mousterian of denticulate tradition, and so on. 4 traditions, and he said they're separate bands, separate cultural groups. Binford came and challenged it. Binford said, I will do multivariate analysis, the same analysis that you have done to see the clustering of like kind of tools, and 4 clusters were obtained. I'll do the same statistics, multivariate analysis, with the addition of a rider of function. Now this function that they talked of, Binford talked of, was common sense level function. Piercing tools, curing tools, like that. I will try to give functional load to these tools. Now you see, you compare with archaeology of 1930s. Here is a different kind of archaeology developing, a new trend where you're trying to ask questions. Are they different tribal groups creating 4 kinds of Mousterian? Professor Francois Bode did a statistics, again multivariate analysis, but on a common sense level he attributed some tools to some group of functions, some other tools to some other group of functions. And he created the same multivariate analysis and proved that these tools of 63 cultural layers do not represent 4 different cultural groups, but they represent 4 cultural seasonal adaptation of a single group. It's a classic example of the problems of going from activity to ethnicity. All activity is not ethnicity, but all ethnicity is part of activity. Now this mistaken identification of some activities as representing a distinct ethnic group was so much wrong, only statistics could prove that they were wrong. So a statistical approach to making a spread of tools found in excavation, a sense of the tools talk about similarity clusters, was for the first time attempted in 1965 by Louis Robert Binford. Almost around the same time, a man called David Clark created a book and he did many articles. Unfortunately, died before the book came. He died very young. He brought out a book called Analytical Archaeology. And he was very scathing of all those the hardcore archaeologists of 30s who was feeling very happy about analyzing the tools and saying so much percentage is hand X, so much percentage is cleaver, and that far and no further. So David Clark, for the first time did analytical archaeology, and he brought out a large amount of analytical model, statistical model to test an hypothesis. A null hypothesis can be tested. If you say site A cluster and site B cluster are belonging to the same community, you create a null hypothesis. Then you create a statistic to show if the null hypothesis is satisfied or is rejected. A rejection of the null hypothesis means that A and B, two sites, are two ethnic groups, and acceptance of the null hypothesis will mean that they are part of the same group. Maybe one is migrated to the other. Now this was done in such a militant way. I wouldn't say militant, there were strong ways that both Binford and Clark started asking questions to any archaeological studies. So much so that in archaeological world, the world of experts, they used to be nicknamed as Bin-Clark Mafia. Bin referring to Binford, Clark referring to David Clark, they were referred to as Bin-Clark Mafia. So you see, up to 1965, large amount of empirical proof was sought for the first time in terms of statistics, in terms of giving functional load to tools and so on. The first time you find these functional loads were also tried to be made empirical and experimental was when a new trend was started called micro-edgeware analysis. Micro-edgeware analysis was started around 1970s or maybe a little later, and where they started doing functions themselves with that same raw material, and whatever the striation marks on the tool will be obtained by doing a particular kind of function was photographed under microscope. So you find a curved line if you have done zigzag cutting matter, and you find a particular kind of lining of striations on the stone. Then you look at the prehistoric stone and do their micro-edgeware analysis and find in the photograph what kind of striation marks have been created on them. So you compare the function you have done on the tool and which has resulted the known lines, and compare with the prehistoric tools which have the same lines, and then say the prehistoric tools must have been functioned or used in this kind of function that I did to produce these lines. They gave a large amount of possibilities of functions from this micro-edgeware analysis. But it still does not, or it still did not answer many of the Bin-Clark questions. Another thing, we have all the time been trying to tell that lower Paleolithic tools, that is the period of tools where the power grip was used, if you remember. So the power grip was used, and that period all tools are multifunctional. And as you come to precision grip tools, they are job specific. If they are job specific, then micro-edgeware should show that each tool has a different job or function for which they were made. And it was found that it is not true. Any available border, if it is sharp enough for his purpose, he has used the same for a knife as also a scraper. So a same tool can be used for a knife as also a scraper. So you find they continue to be multifunctional for a long time, unlike what we have said as precision grip. Another thing happens around the same time, though this was the first attempt, micro-edgeware analysis, where you find an attempt to give or experimental and empirical example to prove the function. It is no longer talking of function in a common sense level as Binford did when he was talking of combigranal material. So this was more empirical and experimental, so it could be demonstrated and not challenged at all. Around this time, another trend came up. It's a trend which was very interesting but did not take up much success because of non-availability of data. This is called the coprolite analysis. Coprolite is human shit, human excreta. Now this human excreta, when found in fossilized form in some sites which are very nicely excavated, you find undigested seeds, you find undigested pollens in the coprolite, in the shit. And this gives you an idea of what are the edible plants that he used to harvest for his own subsistence. Now, this was a very interesting method. That is why it is called paleoethnobotany, this method. Why? Because suppose in a normal palynology, you have found there are 100 edible plants available. Normal paleobotany has shown, or palynology has shown, in a site 100 edible plants are available. And in coprolite analysis, you find only 30 edible plants have been exploited. Then you can say this community is in safe equilibrium with ecology. It is in safe equilibrium with ecology. But if you find in coprolite analysis that this community has exploited more than 80 of the 100 available edible plants, then you say that it has reached its carrying capacity. Carrying capacity means that the community has come to the limit of extraction possibility of the ecosystem, and this is the point of breakup. This is the time the community will decide to create fission and go around to other places to support or to take additional ecosystems for subsistence base. This was very, very interesting possibilities, but sample of coprolite from Paleolithic period was not coming for many places. But look at the coprolite that was found in Terra Amata. Terra Amata, we found, Professor Delumle found coprolite and did the analysis, and all he said was the coprolite analysis shows that the higher slopes have conifers. The site is on the sea beach, and there was a higher slope where there were conifers, and from coprolite analysis he said these people had conifers and therefore they must have been foraging or going into the higher slopes for varieties of reasons, or hunting or whatever. So the point I am trying to make is that Delumle also could not use it for ethnopaleobotany. He could not use it in terms of carrying capacity of the ecosystem. That was a possibility of this coprolite analysis which was not properly harvested, but it is a possibility which is open, and if we find coprolite from more number of sites, more primary sites for that matter, it will be a very good possibility to reconstruct the carrying capacity of the ecosystem up to which the man or the group starts creating fission and going to new ecosystem possibilities. Now, this is one of the methods that developed, or new trend that developed around 1960s or 70s. So 1970s you find some of the new systems that has started becoming standardized, and micro-edgeware analysis, coprolite analysis, two of them. Then of course we can't forget that David Clark has talked about analytical archaeology, which was another trend. For a long time it was used by new archaeologists, but then it could not be really exploited unless there are primary sites. Not much of analysis could be done. So these are new trends which could not be utilized to the fullest potentiality of the trends. Anyway, there were also simultaneously very many people who were trying to standardize the ecosystem analysis. The ecosystem analysis was a cardinal branch of archaeology even in the 30s. When they talk of solifluction, you talk of lowest profile, you talk of end moraine and ground moraine, you talk of details of ecological changes that has been happening because of environmental changes from time to time, including even pH estimation of the soil and so on. So this part of environmental archaeology started coming closer to archaeology. Earlier it was part of geology, part of paleobotany and paleontology, but it started coming closer to archaeology in the time of the new trends, where people started seeking the difference of ethnicity from activity in terms of choosing a component of ecosystem for survival, and another group seeking another component of ecosystem for survival, creating different tool types. Though belonging to the same ecosystem, components have been different. So many possibilities start emerging when you have possibilities of refined analysis of the ecosystem of a given place, slope ecosystem and high elevated positions. So this development immediately led to two very important new trends. These new trends are doing lot of research these days. One is called new catchment area analysis. Catchment area analysis evolved out of this ecosystem analysis, coming close to archaeological imperatives, the questions that archaeologists are asking. And another thing as a new trend that developed is understanding site formation analysis. So site formation analysis and ecosystem analysis and catchment area analysis became the two newest trends in archaeological analysis. These trends, however, did not replace the earlier trends. The earlier trends continue. I recount the earlier trends were analytical archaeology of David Clark, the earlier trends of micro-edgeware analysis, the earlier trend was of coprolite analysis, the earlier trend was also environmental archaeology. These trends are not replaced by catchment area analysis. Catchment area analysis is a complete byproduct of what was done on the Eskimo study that Binford did, which we know all for a long time. He tried to identify the relationship of hunting strategies, and the relationship of settlement strategies. You don't settle in a place where hunting is possible. Hunting may be possible at site A, but settlement is possible at site B, and a site B may have proper air, proper water holes, and you choose that for settlement. But site B or site A may be a place where the animals go for grazing, and they may have large amount of distance between them. So catchment area analysis for the first time brings the activity reconstruction in prehistory. Activity reconstruction has never been done earlier. You have tried on a static ground. Even David Clark's analysis was not activity reconstruction. Only the work of Binford on Combigranal, where he gave functional load and tried to show that these activity differences are not ethnic differences. So activity to ethnicity differentiation was attempted on multivariate analysis before David Clark. And this was done in a satisfactory manner, though the functional loads that he created were all on common sense level. But the creating of micro-edgeware analysis left the common sense attribute of function, and it started making empirical and experimental reality as functional attributes of the tools. Now these are some of the interface between newer and older trends that goes on. Older trends continue to go on even today, because older trends is the pathway to newer trends. You cannot stop from the new trends. You have to have the older trends, which are well-established methods of excavation, and that is a pathway. After the material has been obtained, newer trends try to ask questions which were not asked earlier. They're asking questions of activity, ethnicity, and cultural change. I will address the cultural change issue now. Cultural change is an issue which has not been addressed by any archaeologist anywhere. Even in social anthropology, why should a culture change at what point was very, very roughly estimated in a common sense level. So either invasion, somebody came from somewhere and changed the culture and so on. But I am trying to see culture change in an ethnographic paradigm in order to understand culture change of the past communities. Now this is again something which is in an activity horizon and not in mere analysis of the toolkits of the prehistoric period. Now this activity analysis, you try to reconstruct three attributes, and that's very difficult because empirically they are not demonstrable. One is population density, and the second is technological intensification, and the third is called social complexity. The first is called the demographic or population density, that per square kilometer how many people are living or how many mouths are feeding on 1 square kilometer. This is called population density. And the other point is called technological or economic intensification. And the third point is called social complexity. I try to fit or join these 3 points in a triangular relationship. And I'm trying to show from my hunter-gatherer ethnography, I'm trying to show that each one can affect the other. For example, if the population density increase, obviously you require more food because there are more people per square kilometer. So what do you do when you require more food? you immediately intensify your technology. If you was to harvest smaller amount of things from the lower branches of a tree, you start intensify and go to the upper branches of the tree and try to go for more harvesting of the, if the ecosystem is the same. So if the ecosystem is the same, you start trying to harvest and intensify your technology. We have joined these 3 points. The first point of the triangle is population density. The second point I've already talked about, intensification of technology or economy, depending on whether you are in a younger phase like Neolithic or Chalcolithic. The third point is also very interesting, and it is intimately connected to the other 2 points, that is social complexity. If you have a stress on ecosystem and you intensify your economy, immediately there will be somebody in the population who will try to hijack your produce and run away, or set fire to the extra food that you have collected. So you have to create a social control. Hello, don't touch the extra food that I have created. This is for this. You create a rule of social complexity. This is called hierarchization of access to resource base. If the resource base is A, how much I have access to, a right of access. So if there are 2 kinds of people, one is the ruler, the other is the ruled. The ruler has a right to have more access to the eco base than the ruled. The ruled will have less right. So you create a hierarchization and you standardize in social institution and you call it social complexity. Very common experience of this is that, suppose I am given to adapting to a mango tree, and I am with my wife and I try to harvest the mangoes from the branches as I want, and this is called elemental relationship with the ecosystem, because I use my hand and take the mangoes. It is elemental, it's a body endowment, God-given part of the body. And then when a child is born, an additional mouth has to be fed. So I intensify the economy by taking a stick and going to the upper branches of the tree. By the time I go to the upper branches of the tree, I find the 2 babies I have, they're fighting among themselves. And the fruit that I have harvested are all trampled under their feet. So the harvesting that I have done by intensifying my technology is of no use unless I try to scold them and say, shut up, you have only those who are grown up, or only the elder one will have more access to the food, the other one won't have, or brother will have more access than sister. Depending on what attribute you choose, sex, age, distance, that is depends on the community. But social complexity is a must in order to make the intensification of technology successful. Now let us look at a case where the population increase has to be manipulated by me. Now there is no possibility of intensification of ecosystem in Ladakh. What do you intensify there? Nothing grows. So what you do, you create a social system by way of which it is honorable for every Ladakhi to become a monk for at least half of his reproduction period. So you squeeze the reproduction period. They will become a monk for half of his reproduction period, and a person who has become a monk for that period is a lovable person a girl will fall in love with. But a person who has never been a monk will be ridiculed and said, go and catch hold of your mother's achal, and we don't want you to, or we don't want to fall in love with you. Point I'm trying to make is a value load by the third point of the triangle called social complexity. A value load is created so that the reproduction period of a woman and man is reduced substantially, and population increase is controlled. And you can have another example. In some parts of Rajasthan, there is no possibility of increasing or intensifying the technology. The second point of mine. What you do? You kill the girl child, female infanticide. You kill the girl child after birth. The social complexity that you create is legitimizing a human infanticide of a system so that the population density doesn't increase. So you can see that you can control the equilibrium of a society by way of which you can manipulate these 3 points within the triangle. So any cultural change that occurs anywhere can be looked at not as a mere change as an archaeologist in 1930 has been looking at because of invasion or because of evolution. These are the 2 attributes they used, evolution or invasion, that is diffusion. Now we have a third angle. You can look at the success of a community. If there is a change in technology, you will ask whether there was a change in population density, whether there was a change in social complexity. So you can give a meaning or a larger span of meaning to the simple statement of change, cultural change, that we have been trying to look at from the 1930s or pre-1930s archaeology. So this is a very new trend that we are trying to get. Most of the trends are trying to use or issue those issues they are dealing that has not been touched earlier. The issues are dynamic issues, behavioral issues, activity issues, and these activity issues go beyond mere analysis of a hand axe, mere analysis of flake tools or blade tools and so on. So you find a shift of emphasis that has gone in the new trends in world prehistory. Talking about the dynamics of archaeology, we have been always trying to say that the recent trends or the modern trends in world prehistory shows about not the static analysis of the material, but the dynamic component of archaeology, naming how the activities were committed and how the activities differed from ethnicity, or if at all differed or not. So you have a kind of a different component of analysis of the same raw material, which were basically activity reconstruction. Recently, there are some late Bronze Age sites in Europe which have been meticulously analyzed to show the migration of communities using, for instance, obsidian as a tool. And this obsidian material is found going up to northern Canada and even Russia. So these materials are of Chalcolithic period, and the raw material having changed to obsidian, which is a black stone, and is a very beautiful black stone. And this obsidian as a raw material has been found to be quarried from Denmark. So you find the place of quarry of the raw material, the place where they're incorporated in tools, and the way the tools migrated from one place to another, as excellent analysis of migration of prehistoric populations. Similar studies have not been done for older communities, older cultures. Older cultures, it is very difficult to talk about migrations, though there are attempts. And one of the attempts I can talk about, which was done on a common sense level, but at least the questions were asked. There is a kind of tools that you find during Middle Paleolithic and Upper Paleolithic in Balkans region and a part of Czechoslovakia, Romania, and these are called Blattspitzen. These are thin bifacial tools which are found to expand from these Balkans and part of Czechoslovakia and Romania to go as far as Ukraine in Moldova and Kostiinki. So you have a possibility of talking of migration from this place to Ukraine, but these are done on a common sense level. If you find the same tool repeated elsewhere and not found anywhere else, at a common sense level you can say this tool shows, these are the marker tools attributes to show a migration of Paleoethnic community. Paleoethnic migrations have become a very popular study for Harappan archaeology. But then it is not still matured to use standardized techniques or experimental techniques to show how a community migrated from one. I'll talk about one semantics, and this is very interesting. When you come to Harappan expansion from the Harappan base, which is Punjab and part of Haryana and Rajasthan, and you find this migration occurring around 2200 BC in Saurashtra. When it comes, there was already from 2700 BC, there was a Chalcolithic site here, and there was Chalcolithic pottery available here. What an interesting phenomena. Harappan, such a powerful group with such powerful urban settlement possibilities, come to Saurashtra, but not a single pre-Harappan Chalcolithic is touched. They continue to occur without change. Now this shows again, as many Oriental archaeologists talk about, that in India, old is never replaced by the new. In Europe, old is always annihilated, finished, and then new is replaced. But in India, old continues, and this site is called Antara. Antara is near Baroda. There is a site where 2700 BC you have pottery and grid pottery, not very fine pottery. And in spite of Harappans bringing such beautiful pottery, they don't interfere with the Antara, and Antara continues. So you have a possibility of paleoethnic migrations, and from paleoethnic migration, talk about the nature of change, once old changing to new, sometimes old continue with the new, and so on and so forth. So very interesting sociological interpretations can be given from archaeology if you properly set your questions and also create a proper methodology to answer and ask those questions. Unfortunately, this kind of archaeology is still in a very infantile stage in India. I am sure it will develop in course of time. The amount of emphasis the archaeologists are paying on Harappan sites, I am sure many questions about Harappan expansion will very soon be addressed. Thank you.